So, good morning and welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm Megan Buick, the General Manager of Comcare's Strategic Partnerships and Engagement Group, and I'll be your MC for today's event. Just some housekeeping to begin. We would really like this webinar to be quite interactive, so we encourage you to participate through the chat function, sharing your thoughts and insights, and in particular, please think about some questions that you might like to ask. We are recording the session today. However, it's only myself and our guest speaker, Georgie, and the slides that is going to be recorded. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are virtually meeting today. I am in Brisbane, so I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I acknowledge the contribution that they make to this nation, and I extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islander people. For those attending a Comcare webinar for the first time, thank you very much for joining us. And for returning attendees, welcome back. It's great to have you with us today. Today, the 10th of October, is World Mental Health Day. Mental Health Australia's focus for the campaign on this day is awareness, belonging and connection, with the tagline, Look After Your Mental Health Australia. Comcare is a strong supporter of the campaign, and as we know, workplaces and good work play a vital role in contributing to workers' positive mental health, preventing harm and supporting recovery from ill health. We want all of our workplaces to fully appreciate the importance of psychological safety in the workplace, and that everyone can and has a role to play. It's great to see everyone's chats coming through about where they're from. What a fantastic array of people. So it's wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Later this month, Comcare is launching a workplace mental health stigma awareness program called Mental Notes. Psychological injury claims are increasing and often more complex to resolve compared to other injury types. Currently, 12% of all Comcare claims are for psychological injury. Stigma is associated with the experiences of mental ill health, and this is often a barrier to seeking support and returning to work after injury. To effectively address this issue, focus needs to be on prevention and early intervention. This includes creating mentally healthy workplaces where mental health is not a taboo topic and can be discussed openly. Developing mental health literacy and support skills will assist organisations to ensure their workers are appropriately supported within their workplace. The Mental Health Notes initiative has 3 aims, which are on the screen now: awareness, education, and behaviour change. The program will be available through a dedicated website with resources such as a manager toolkit, guidance materials, and editable creative assets like posters, email signatures, backgrounds, and screensavers. And the program tagline is Everyday Wellbeing at Work. We encourage you to take a look at these fantastic resources when it's available through our website. So now on to a really important aspect of the day is the conversation and to introduce our guest speaker. We're so lucky to have Georgie Harman joining us. Georgie Harman is one of Australia's most influential and trusted figures in the mental health sector. She leads with a community heart and a business head. Since being appointed CEO of Beyond Blue in 2014, Georgie has steered the conversation through significant growth and through significant growth and transformation, expanding its services and supports, strengthening connection to the community, and harnessing digital innovation. She is Deputy Chair of the Australian National Advisory Council on Alcohol and Other Drugs and serves on the board of Mental Health Australia and mentoring organisation Kilfinane Australia. She is a patron of Out for Australia, an organisation that supports young LGBTIQA+ professionals. Before taking up the position at Beyond Blue, Georgie had broad-ranging leadership, policy and service delivery experience in the community, public and private sectors. She helped set up the National Mental Health Commission, where she was Deputy CEO, providing independent advice to government on mental health reform and system performance. From 2006 to 2012, Georgie was a senior executive at the Commonwealth Department of Health with responsibility for mental health, suicide prevention, substance misuse, cancer and chronic disease policy and programs. She also spearheaded the early strategy and development of legislation to introduce plain packaging of tobacco products in Australia This was a world first and recently clicked over 10 years, and something that has also been replicated by other countries. And I think just a really incredible program for prevention and early intervention, well, prevention. Georgie has also led national reforms to lift Australia's organ and tissue donation rates and worked in the HIV/AIDS sector in Australia and the UK. And it is great pleasure that I welcome Georgie Harman and invite her to contribute any opening remarks.
Thanks, Megan, and good morning, everybody. I'm joining you from absolutely beautiful Wurundjeri country here in Melbourne, and I pay my deepest respects to elders past and acknowledge emerging leaders too. This is Aboriginal land. It's a day that obviously is important to me and my organisation, but and I would say that, wouldn't I? But you know, it's really good to have a little bit of focus on context of Comcare's work and all the work that you guys do. But also, I think generally as a community, I think the last couple of years have really tested sorely and continue to test sorely our well-being and our mental health. And you know, the conversation is a really alive and well one. And I think that's really important because if we don't have good mental health, nothing works for us. It's a bit like physical health, the two go hand in hand, and it links to our ability to hold down a good job. It links to our ability to kind of put food on the table. It links to our relationships with people, whether that's at work or outside of work. So mental health is everything, people, and we all need to be doing everything we can to be looking after ourselves and supporting those around us.
Thank you, Georgie. Thanks for your opening remarks. And you're quite right. Happy Mental Health Day, everyone. So the webinar is an opportunity to have a discussion with Georgie. Georgie and I are going to kick off the conversation, but I really encourage you to think about and invite you, the audience, to ask some questions through the chat tab. There already have been some questions that have already been put forward, so we'll endeavour to also address those as we go through. So World Mental Health Day might be a good place to start our conversation, Georgie. Why is it important to have a global day to recognise mental health?
Look, I think it's well, it's important. I mean, I think it's self-evident, right? As I said in my opening remarks, you know, if we don't have good mental health, nothing else quite works as well. So, you know, I've got a bit of a, you know, I think it's a really important day as a day to focus and to create awareness and to reduce stigma and start the conversation. But you know, we've got to move past that. We've got to make sure that this is something we're thinking about every day. Whether that's at home with our families and loved ones, whether that's with our work colleagues and the teams that we may lead or manage, whether that's, you know, the person that we walk past in the street that we think, oh, they don't look great, you know, perhaps I should just stop and say, hey, is everything okay? So mental health to me is something that we need to be thinking about every day. The theme for 2022 is about making mental health and wellbeing a global priority, and I think again, you know, the last couple of years have absolutely punctuated that mental health actually underpins everything. For those of you who were really, you know, affected by the pandemic, whether that was because you were separated from loved ones, whether that was because you were disconnected from your colleagues at work, whether that was because you live with a chronic disease or you support someone who does, whether that you lost someone to COVID. This has been an incredibly dislocating period in history, and one that continues to challenge our well-being. But the one thing I think that we did have, which was incredibly useful, was a far deeper conversation about mental health and well-being, and indeed suicide prevention. Because we know that connection as human beings actually keeps us, you know, it keeps us well. It creates those anchors in our life that actually, you know, make us happy humans. And as humans, we're actually hardwired to have other humans in our lives and to have a sense of certainty and predictability. And as we all know, that got taken away from us to a large degree. So that lack of control was really affected people's poor mental health. We know that the mental health impacts of the pandemic will be long and deep. And we know that already it's inequitable. So we know that for many people, including those in insecure work, who don't have good work, those who already live with a mental health condition or a chronic disease, those who live in poverty, those who are homeless, those from the LGBTIQ plus community, those from First Nations communities, they're already doing it tougher, and the pandemic's just heightened that inequity, and also highlighted the existing systemic failures that we face as a country. So, you know, at Beyond Blue, we're very determined to continue advocacy work, in particular around proper, genuine system reform, but also to ensure that we are playing a major role in supporting people through new and different ways. And, you know, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, this is an important day, but for me, this is about all of us, and 1 in 6 of us will have a mental health condition this year. 1 in 6 of us will experience suicidal thoughts in our lifetime. So, you know, this is not about other people, it's about all of us.
Thanks, Georgie. And yes, I think it is an incredible opportunity for us to really talk about mental health. But again, it shouldn't be just obviously limited to one day. I think it's something that's absolutely vital that we keep the conversation alive for now and into the future. So I think you've just touched on it. So we've experienced significant challenges over the last few years. We've talked about the pandemic, talked about extreme weather events that's had a remarkable impact and continues to. There's economic and social impacts, and in particular, there's changes to how we work. What are some of the significant short and or long-term changes in the mental health landscape that you've observed, and what do you think, more importantly, that we can work collectively to seek to address some of those?
Sure. Well, there's 3 really important pieces of research or studies that very recently been released. The first is the Australian Bureau of Statistics released just a few months ago, the first national study, the first national household study into the state of the nation, like what is the mental health of Australia, and that I think was 12 or 15 years since we had the last one. So really significant. And what that's shown is that prevalence actually hasn't changed that much. So it's really stubbornly static at about 20% of us experiencing a lifetime mental health condition. What it did show is changes in help seeking, which is positive, but it also showed that for many people, they're still not getting the access to affordable mental health support that they need. The second piece of information that I want to talk about is a survey that we've actually released today, that Beyond Blue released today. And that was a study of 1,500 Australians in late August. We're very committed to take pulse checks of what is actually going on for people, because we need our counsellors to be aware of what the real issues are for real Australians. And so we surveyed people about, you know, what's actually causing you distress at the moment? What's worrying you? And it's not COVID anymore. COVID is a real issue, especially for people who live with, you know, compromised immune systems or, you know, a whole range of other health and mental health conditions. But for most Australians, in fact, for every single person that responded to this survey, they weren't that worried about it anymore. It's actually just become part of life. But what is really worrying people, and I think it's only going to, you know, continue, is financial stress and the cost of living. So things that are largely out of our control, the cost of inflation, interest rates, the cost of petrol and groceries. Even if you've got a good job, the workforce shortages and the ongoing impacts of working from home and feeling isolated are really starting to affect people. But also those big global factors, you know, weather events, the war in Ukraine, these are the things that are really, really causing people great anxiety and concern at the moment. And what is most worrying about that data great. They still felt very uncertain and worried. They worried a lot, but they didn't feel that their issue was bad enough to seek support or to talk about it. And that sort of, editing yourself out of help seeking is something that we need to really, really focus on. Because my message to everyone constantly is you don't need to be in crisis. In fact, don't wait till you're in crisis to seek support. Beyond Blue services, a whole range of other great organisation services are there for everything, for anybody, anytime, day or night. There's no issue too big or small. And the sooner you reach out for support and guidance and tips, the sooner you'll get back to being you. And one of the things that people don't realize about our service, our 24/7 support service, is that we've got incredibly strong referral pathways to a whole range of other supports that are there for people. So, for example, financial counselling. We've got a great relationship and a partnership with Financial Counselling Australia. So we often identify through that initial contact with our counsellor that actually it's money that's really causing the distress. So we connect them into a financial counsellor, and that's a free service. So there are a whole range of issues that. The third piece of information I want to talk about is Mental Health Australia, who's our peak body, released a report on the nation again this morning. And what, again, that's showing is that the importance of informal connections. And this is one of the things that, you asked in your question about what needs to change. We need to start recognizing and valuing more and more the incredible importance of having informal networks, friends, loved ones, a date on a Saturday night. These are the things that, again, they keep us better than we would be if we didn't have them. So yes, services are really important, clinical services are really important, but actually we need to be thinking about connectedness, community, housing, job security, all of the things that the informal supports in the community that actually protect our mental health, and even if we are mentally unwell, actually are so important to our recovery. So yeah, really interesting. About 55% from friends, family and colleagues. And again, workplaces. Workplaces are communities. We spend a lot of time, whether they're in the hybrid world now or face-to-face, and we've got to really, continue to bolster up the capacity and knowledge and commitment of workplaces to be looking after the mental health of their people.
Thanks, Georgie. I'm glad that you've commented on that in terms of the workplace being a real contributor to, to supporting people's positive mental health. And I think that informal connection, if you think about work, there's such a strong opportunity there to use work to support that. Obviously, it's highly relevant, and I think it's where the hybrid work, maximising the opportunities around the flexibility that COVID has presented us with, allowing the working from home and things like that, as well as jumping into that hybrid work and getting that right to maximise that informal network. So, and that's something that I think workplaces are continuing to work on, and I know certainly within Comcare ourselves, we're continuing to work on getting that balance right, but also making sure when people are here, that within the office, that there's an opportunity to have those conversations, because you realise, of course, once that occurs, what you've kind of been missing for a little while. And having been in Melbourne, that's been quite an obvious note, I think, within our workplace. So thank you for that. And thank you for making note of those reports. I think what we'll do is make sure that we've got some links to those following the session today, or put them through the chat as well. So I think the next sort of question that we were looking to just kick off is, we know that mental health doesn't discriminate. And I just wondered if you could give us a little bit of feedback or some thoughts about how you go about managing your own mental health. And I know that you've shared some things in the past, and I think it's really helpful to hear about how people themselves manage mental health. I know that, myself, it's very strongly linked to exercise and making sure I fit that into my day. But I'm just really interested to hear from you about what your thoughts are about how you go about managing your own mental health.
Oh, look, Megan, I should be really good at it, shouldn't I? But like the rest of you, I'm a bit of a work in progress, and I think, I've talked very openly about my experience, my experiences living with depression, and that sort of, I think, was probably about 2016. What's that? About 8 years ago now? Is that right? 6 years ago. First episode depression at the age, in my 40s. And I did everything wrong. I hid it from friends and family. I, turned to alcohol to numb the pain and to help me sleep, which of course it didn't. It just made things worse. Put on huge amounts of weight, threw myself into work, and, just didn't take my own medicine. And, it took a couple of conversations with both a work colleague and a friend who basically said, look, we see what's going on. That made me think, oh, that mask isn't working anymore. I better pull it down and do the things that I know will help me. So, medication for a while, sought some psychological support from a great psychologist for a while, but changed the practices that actually, again, provide me with those anchors. So exercise is a really big thing for me, whether that's a gentle walk with my dog, who's now 19 and can't walk anything other than more, gently these days, or whether that is a really, intensive workout with my personal trainer. Exercise, sleep is probably the second most important thing for me. And, good hygiene habits when it comes to sleep, no screens an hour before bedtime, trying to limit alcohol during the week, that kind of thing. Trying to get that 7 or 8 hours in, that changes my world. And I know if I don't get enough sleep, I start to, exhibit the signs that I know things are a bit wobbly. And the last thing for me is actually just people. Like, I am actually an introvert, and in many senses, as a Melburnian, being cooped up in my little house by myself suited me just fine. And I had to really force myself to stay connected with people. So, I've got now a WhatsApp group with my family. We probably have more daily contact than we ever have had in our lives, and that's something that is continuing. Hanging out with my partner and my friends is just so enriching and so nourishing. So these are all things that actually are not associated with services. They're all things that are very simple, that sound too good to be true, but that are actually probably the most important things that we can do for our mental health, alongside obviously those more intensive supports when we need them. So again, I want us to all start thinking about mental health in a much less service-driven lens. It's about community. It's about connection. It's about mateship and friendship. It's about, sleep, diet, exercise, moving our bodies, keeping our minds active, all of these things, getting out in nature. Thank you, Chloe. Really, really, really important things. And that's what I practice. But I go through waves of not being very good at practicing it. But it's like a muscle. The more you go to the gym, the stronger you become, the actually better you become at this. And it becomes second nature. I'm going through a stage at the moment where I'm actually not doing it very well. So, I start off small and I think, okay, well, I'm not going to try and do everything all at once. I'm going to do one thing. And build up your muscle slowly. You're going to have far more success at that. But I think, again, us all talking about our experiences, I have no shame in talking about the fact that I have lived with depression, and that I am susceptible to it. I experienced it again during I came very close, I think, to reaching that clinical threshold during lockdowns. There are things that we have to do, and one of them is talking about it. And reaching out to those that we're concerned about and having those, what can be challenging and scary conversations. we're actually okay at them. You know, just be yourself, be human. You know, the "are you okay" thing, follow through. You know, if someone says, actually, no, I'm really not, you know, sit down and say, okay, well, what's going on for you? Let me listen. And don't try and find solutions or try and solve the person's problem or tell them that, you know, they've got so much going for them. Actually just sit and listen. And then just say things like, hey, should we pick up the phone and speak to Beyond Blue together? Why don't you, you know, have you talked to your partner about it if they've got a partner? Have you thought about going to see a GP? Can I help you to make that appointment? There are things that we can do at very practical levels that are about being a good human. So yeah, there's a few thoughts from me.
Thanks, Georgie. And there's quite a lot coming through the chat, which I think picks up on your point around sharing, actually. So I think that's brilliant. So people are really putting through the things that support their mental health in terms of helping them. So walking is obviously one. Also, the social support networks, as you've mentioned. And I think nature, I love that. I think that's quite right. You know, I personally think that's really wonderful as well for myself. I really like being surrounded by green, something that gets away from the concrete and into those sorts of environments. And also people are suggesting that sometimes it's difficult to exercise, and whether it's you know, physically challenging and those things as well. And I think they're also important for us to think about.
Absolutely.
How we can you know, there are things to support people, even if exercise, for instance, is not the best option for them. So,
Absolutely.
and I think, again, as you said, pick up the phone and have a conversation. There are lots of great resources around that are able to support people.
Do you know what? Just again, it sounds so silly, doesn't it? But breathing, 3 deep breaths, just centers yourself, and you know, mindfulness. So there's, you know, a proliferation of apps about, you know, stopping us down, slowing our minds down. They actually work. So again, I totally take that point around, you know, inability to exercise. But you know, there's ways we can exercise our minds and slow our minds down as well. I think that are good for all of us.
I think that's a brilliant suggestion. And like you say, that you know, just stopping and being in the moment too, and having that opportunity. I think that mindfulness piece is really important. And again, there's lots of apps that, you know, you might want to find the one that works for you, or can support you in sort of how you're going on that particular day. And I guess doing it consistently is also really helpful. So trying to fit it into your routine, because I know that that's a really big part of structuring your time to make sure that you get the best out of it. So I think gratefulness is coming through, and I love that as well. I think that's that practicing that you know, gratefulness. I think that's also a nice it's a nice trigger. So I guess we're going a little bit into this, but interested in resilience. So we talk about resilience, and we've certainly been talking about resilience for some time now. And I guess the focus is often on individual resilience and, I guess, that personal responsibility. And I just wanted to talk about, or have a conversation about, the relationship between organisational resilience, adaptability, and positive mental health, and what that looks like, and whether or not you could tease a little bit of that out for us, Georgie. And again, there's a lot coming through the chat, which is wonderful. Thank you. That actually also highlights some of those things as well. For example, people having to work a little bit with their organisation about getting the balance right for them around whether they were having a little bit of anxiety coming into the office, and making sure that works. So I think that organisational resilience is a really great one. So do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, look, I have many comments about resilience. I have a bit of an interesting relationship, I think, with the concepts of resilience at an individual level. I think, you know, how can we expect people to be resilient if the social and economic and life structures around them cause them insecurity, distress, pain, violence? There are so many. I think this notion of individual resiliency we need to reframe, because unless people have the lives and social structures around them that actually help them to be resilient, you know, you end up basically making people feel worse about themselves, because if you telling someone to be resilient can actually sound a lot like you're telling them to suck it up or be strong. Why aren't you stronger? You know, and again, that's can really contribute to feelings of failure and lack of resiliency. And why can't I be resilient? So I think we've got to shift the narrative from individual resilience to collective resilience and community resilience and workplace resilience and organizational resilience. And also right now, people are still feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and like they don't have much left in the tank. The comments around social anxiety about coming back to work, that is a real thing. And if organizations are not actually looking out for that and thinking about that and supporting people who are feeling that way, you know, they're going to lose those people. So I think let's think about, you know, in the context of workplaces, how does building organizational resilience look? And really that's about workplaces that value and look after their employees' mental health. And that is not, and this is something I've been saying for years, it is not about fruit bowls and yoga. It's not about morning teas, not about posters. Those are all, you know, useful and nice things to do. It is about good job design. Does a person know what they're actually employed to do? What the purpose of their role is, how it connects with other parts of the business, what are their objectives, how is their performance going to get measured, how do they connect with organizational strategy and purpose and mission? Job design is incredibly important. Are their hours? Is their workload reasonable for the hours? Job clarity, again, very important. Culture. You know, we're all trying to figure out how to build a different type of culture, as many of our organizations are embracing hybrid for the first time. It was the greatest global experiment ever seen by our lifetime, and I think it should be here to stay. So, but it does mean recalibrating and redesigning with your teams. What actually does our culture look like now as an organization? Because it does there have to be different strategies. Flexibility for me is absolutely key. This is a buyer's market. People are making different choices and decisions about when they want to work, who they want to work for, where they want to work. And the reality is, I mean, you know, we've got massive amounts of vacancies at Beyond Blue at the moment, and we really, you know, we don't struggle to attract people, but you know, we're also losing good people because people are making choices that look different. So to me, you know, at Beyond Blue, our central premise about who we are now is about flexibility. Hybrid is here to stay. We've got to balance organisational needs with the desires and needs of individuals, whether that comes to caring responsibilities or travel or whatever it is, but we can make this work. And it's about just continue to have open dialogue, knowing where your thresholds are about when you require people to connect in a face-to-face way, but also just making sure that you're constantly listening to your team, what's working, what's not. And I think it's going to be it's going to take a while for us to kind of figure it out. And the last thing for me is about leadership. And in fact, it's the last thing, but it's the first thing. Unless we actually have leaders who walk the talk, it's no good, again, to just say the mental health of my people are really good for me, is important to me, and it's good for business. It's actually really important to demonstrate that. To not be sending emails at ridiculous times of the day and night, to be talking openly about your own experiences, because we've all got stories, to be showcasing what good looks like and actually demonstrating flexibility in your own workplace practices, and to be absolutely intolerant of bullying, harassment, and poor cultural practices that actually discriminate and cause harm to people. So all of these things I think are really important, and it will look different for every workplace, but the tenets are the same: leadership, culture, flexibility, job design, and job clarity.
Thanks, Georgie. And you're certainly getting a lot of supports through the chat in what you're saying. And I think I know I'll be very open. Occasionally I fall into the trap of sending emails after hours, and then I flip and think, gosh, if I logged onto my computer and I was a colleague and I saw 3 or 4 emails from myself at, relatively late, what message does that send? And I think that's what we need to continually be mindful of and really cognizant of in terms of how you change the way in which you do that, and perhaps have a conversation, because a lot of the time, as you well know, I'm sure you can all appreciate this, you can often do a lot more business just by picking up the phone and having a 2 to 3 minute conversation with someone, as opposed to even some of those emails and things. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the chat. So just to call out, we've got some great comments through and some really important, important things that people are talking about and commenting on. And I think a lot of people are really recognising the working from home and the hybrid arrangements. And I think you're right, Georgie. That's going to take a little while to get right. I think we're learning to design those days and how that looks, and I think that's going to take a little while, and it's going to look different. I think it's also important. A few people have mentioned they don't have a lot of options to work from home, given the type of work they do.
Yeah.
So I think that that's also important to recognise, and we need to. I think that's also where organisations need to be across what it is that they can do in those environments around, for example, breaks and things like that, and how they perhaps lean in and listen. I think, to your point, to what their workers are saying.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And again, it's been the experience of the last couple of years, isn't it? It's the narrative has been about, working from home, flexibility. It's people that look like us and that have jobs like us that actually have been afforded this privilege, right? And then the people who often carry 3 or 4 jobs, or, are working in industries and in types of roles that actually there is no option. They have to be physically present in their workplace. We absolutely need to be talking about that too. And in many organizations that have both types of work and workforces that actually have different inherent requirements of their role, that's a conversation that you need to have, and that I think leaders need to be talking about openly. Because, and again, it's about that, how do we build a new culture together? There is a sense of collectivism in this, I think. And again, I think that was one of the beautiful things that we saw for moments of the pandemic, was a sense of people coming together, putting their differences aside and sorting out problems together, supporting one another, meeting strangers, care packages, whatever, saying thank you to cleaners and to people who work in our supermarkets. But, for workplaces that or for people that don't have the option to work from home, that's a conversation that leadership needs to be having with their workforces, I think. So, okay, well, what could that look like so that there is a greater sense of equity here? So that we are, we do have solidarity about this, that we do actually realise privilege when it's there. And what can we all do together to make it feel like it's a bit more of a level playing field? Having said that, if you go for a job that does require you to, work physically somewhere, that's the choice you make, I guess. But I think it's a conversation that we shouldn't bury. Can I go back to one of the questions that was in the chat about burnout?
Yeah,
I
please do.
think it was from, I think it might have been Michelle. Sorry if I've got your name wrong, Michelle. So the question was about, burnout's a real thing, right? And, how do we avoid burnout? How do we prevent burnouts in a work situation, especially with, more and more pressure on certain industries and work types, vacancy rates being what they are, difficulties with the labour market? Really great question. I don't have the answer to it, unfortunately. But to me, it's like anything. Burnout is a real thing. It's not something it's something that creeps up on you quite slowly and then hits you like a ton of bricks. So again, as managers and leaders, we need to be educating ourselves about what the signs and symptoms of burnout are. We need to be equipping our teams to be looking out for their colleagues. And we need to be having those conversations with individuals around, what is reasonable, what is a workload that actually is sustainable. And as leaders, it's incumbent on us and managers to be making prioritization decisions. We cannot expect people to be producing the same amount of output with 20% less staff or 10% less staff. You have to redesign what's really important to your business, to your purpose as an organization, and stop some things or pause some things and focus on the things that really matter right now. And that might mean giving people opportunities in different types of roles, redeploying them across the organisation, because it will inevitably mean that some teams are less busier than others. So for me, it is about, again, that job design, and really monitoring people's workloads, well-being, and having those ongoing conversations about how people are going, checking in. We were very good at that over the last couple of years. That's a practice that we need to continue.
Thanks, Georgie. I think that's some really great suggestions there. And I think also some things that can be picked up, when I say relatively easily, I think we do often will just keep picking up the work and then sharing it out amongst teams, for example. And I think every single conversation needs to be, does something need to stop for this to be done? And
Yeah.
what does that look like for your teams? How do we distribute the work, or how do we stop the work? And I think that's something that we need to get better at. I think that we often just, and I think someone said, pick things up and pile things on. And I do think that that's a really important thing. And again, it's about the conversation with your workers, and to talk with them about, what does that look like for you? How's that going to impact your current workload and those in your team? And how do we change that? What is it that we can deprioritize, for example? So really important conversations, and I think ones that need to be very consistent. So even if it's not in the context of a whole big new project, it could be people are on leave, or at the moment, I'm not sure if people are experiencing the same things. People are very tired. So there's a lot of encouragement around people need to take the leave, and they need to take more than 4 days off or a long weekend, and I think that, coupled with, well, we've still got to continue the work. We just need to be very mindful that consistent conversation all the time around what does that look like for your team? Can you manage it? And how do we go about working with that? And I think it's very much that open communication as well, which is key.
And to me, it's about, and this is a conversation we're having every day at Beyond Blue, right? We're terrible at stopping things because there's so much to do. There's so much need out there. But we've been having these very, very precise conversations in the last few months about what actually really matters, what really matters to the communities that we're here and get paid to serve, right? And, that constant listening, some of that data that I talked about earlier, the survey that we've just done, do we need to keep doing stuff that we've done in the past just because we've done that in the past? A culture of business is not helpful for anyone. So again, having those very precise conversations about what actually is going on there in the real world. What is our mission? Coming back again, why do we exist? And again, for every organization, it'll be different. What is going to create the best and greatest value to our customer? And I use that term broadly. For me, it's people who are affected by depression, anxiety, and suicide. For others, it'll be a whole different definition. But what really matters to the people and communities that we are paid to support or serve or provide services to or provide product to. And I think that is a very, very helpful framing, because it helps you get your red pen out and go, you know what, that's really important work, but it's actually not essential right now. This is what's important. This is what's important to our community. This is what's important to our shareholders, however you express it. And then again, you can have that conversation with your team about, this is why we're making this decision. And it's a very difficult rationale to argue against. And again, I think, some of the best ideas come from the shop floor, if you like, us going out and saying to teams, what's actually important right now and what could you stop doing? So again, creating a sense of it being not just a top-down directive, but actually a bottom-up. And when the two meet in the middle, that's really where the kind of beautiful stuff happens.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a great response. If we wanted to talk a little bit about one of the ways in which people can receive help, I just thought it might be useful just to touch a little bit on the New Access Workplaces program. Sorry, not just New Access Workplaces, but New Access. And I know that you've got some experience, obviously, with this fabulous program, Georgie. But did you want to give us a little bit of an idea about what your thoughts are about new access, and I can just talk a tiny bit, not very
Yeah.
long, about what Comcare's doing in this space too.
Yes, so New Access is something that we developed at Beyond Blue about 10 years ago. We started researching it. It's based on a program in the UK, and basically it's a program that actually smashes all of the barriers to access that exist currently in the Australian mental health system. So it's free. It's highly accessible. You don't need a doctor's referral, and you can self-refer. We don't talk about depression, anxiety, and mental illness. We talk about trouble sleeping. You you and your partner fighting all the time? You know, are you just worrying about stuff? Are you feeling like you can't get on top of things? Most of the referrals come through Facebook and social media because we're out there talking about it in very sort of human, real life terms. It's creating a new workforce, a new mental health workforce. We call them coaches, and they are amazing people with great communication skills that are employed, you know, by the businesses or the organisations that we're working with to commission New Access. They're put through a really intensive training session. They're ready to see people within, I think it's 12 weeks. They're clinically supervised. And most importantly to me, as a policy wonk, we are able to measure in real time people's recovery through clinically validated recovery measures. And that individual data is shared with the person who's going through the program. It's shared with the coach, it's shared with the clinical supervisor. So everybody can see that it's working, or it's maybe their recovery is not going as quickly. So we adjust the strategy a bit. And then that de-identified data is shared with funders. So unlike, you know, for example, EAPs, where as an employer I have no idea, I can see activity data, but I have no idea whether my staff who are using our EAP are actually improving. It's being helpful to them. They're recovering. So this is a program that we started. It's very safe, very evidence-based, designed to overcome the issues of affordability, accessibility, and measurement, outcomes measurement. We've now, I think, got 15 or 20 services around the country. We designed a special one for small business owners during COVID, which is just going gangbusters. And all of our coaches have a small business background. We're working with Comcare. And here is my nice segue to you, Megan.
Thanks, Georgie. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, New Access Workplaces is something that Comcare has been working with for some time, and we've run a number of pilots, and we've just recently concluded one. And really this was where we were making this great service available through the a number of Australian public service agencies, and we had really strong recovery rates. And to your point, Georgie, I think just being able to demonstrate that. So we had a recovery rate of 72%, and really also you know, a very strong evaluation around improved worker wellbeing and productivity, and that was just great. It was a great result. So I think it's just worth highlighting some of these programs, and I think for what Georgie's talking about in terms of being highly accessible, and I think that's probably one of the key elements to this, and really focusing on people's individual goals and needs, and not sort of having a really structured program that looks to one or two things. And I think that was one of the key things. So we've evaluated the program, and essentially we're really committed to expanding that and looking at ways in which we can expand that into the future. So it was really just a comment on a great program that is New Access, and both operational in the community, also in small business now, and in workplaces too. So I think something, just another you know, service that's worth having a look at. And if those of you are interested, there's information available. I thought it might be useful, Georgia. We had some great questions prior to the meeting today, and I just wouldn't mind asking a couple of those. Also acknowledging we're getting furious questions through the chat, so there's no shortage. But one of the ones I did want to talk about was that there's a lot of value in workplace diversity across a range of spectrums, from gender, cultural background, sexual identity, physical ability, and neurodiversity as well. How does attention to inclusion and accessibility have a positive impact on mental health in the workplace? And I think that's a great question. So thank you to the person who asked it.
It's such a great question. It really is. Michael and Tara, we wish there was a new access in every single community, right? But there isn't. We're really working hard to increase the funding for the service. So if there isn't a service in your area, please know we're trying to work on it. There is a telehealth service for Victoria statewide, but you obviously, neither one of you live in Victoria at this stage, so sorry about that. But again, you know, if you want to write to your local MP and tell them about new access, be my guest. Back to your question. A workplace that, look, the evidence, I don't know why we keep on having this conversation, because the evidence is, again, absolutely immutable. A workplace that embraces diversity and is accessible to everybody, whether that's culture, colour of skin, gender identity or sexuality, you know, where you were born, your, you know, the way you think, you know, the way your brain works, whether you live with a mental health condition or you don't, whether you live with neurodiversity or you don't, whether you live with disability or you don't. This is who we are, right? And a workplace that reflects the rich tapestry of the kind of Australia that we want to be a part of, I think, again, will be the kind of workplace that thrives and that will have amazing people that work productively, that produce fantastic outcomes for their customers, communities, shareholders, whatever. And if we flip that lens from a lens that's about deficit risk to one that's actually about the joy of this, that is an incredibly powerful thing. We know that teams that look like each other don't produce as much innovative and productive and quality work as teams that are diverse. We know that. The evidence is in. And just from the mental health lens, there's a woman that I had the joy of meeting a few years ago. Her name's Sarah. She lives in South Australia. She lives with very complex mental illness, and she talks about, and I'll quote from her because I don't like talking, I'll use her words. She said, someone like me who's come through a tremendous amount of adversity and has come out the other side with my intelligence and my humanity intact has a massive number of skills. They might be difficult ones to write up in a resume, but when you can get yourself through things like feeling chronically suicidal and you're still standing on the other side of that, you have some amazing skills to contribute. But there is still a culture of fear around a mental health diagnosis, around someone having a label. We think it means they're incompetent, they're dangerous, they're unskilled, or they're unsafe. And what it does to people like us, it makes us keep secrets. It makes us feel ashamed of ourselves. So Sarah's plea to everybody, and it's my plea too, is workplaces need to think differently about people who live with mental health challenges, because you are losing out from incredibly rich talent and diverse thinking and diversity of experience that can actually be incredibly powerful if it's supported through good job design and flexibility when the person needs it, and being part of a team where there is that diversity of thought. And when you invest in people like that, they are incredibly loyal. They work really hard. They stick by you. So again, I'd encourage everybody to be talking about this differently and to turn this from an issue around, you know, diversity and inclusion for the sake of it, but diversity and inclusion because it works, it matters, and it actually produces the best outcomes for business and for workplaces.
Thanks, Georgie. And yes, what a powerful statement, really. And I think we can talk about it in that we know the evidence is there. It is very clear, and it's been there for some time now. And so I think having, I guess, also for me, a bit about that lived experience voice is really hugely powerful in what it actually means and translates to. So thank you for sharing that. I'm just conscious of the time, so I can't believe that we've run through so quickly. So we've got a few minutes left. So we've got about five minutes left, and I think there was a couple of other questions. One of the other ones, how do we encourage I think we've talked a little bit about that open dialogue and discussion around mental health and wellbeing in your organisation. So I think it's a little bit about what we've talked about. So I think we've talked a little bit about that, but I'm not sure whether or not you've got some tips for people that are talking through, sending chats through, asking around how to have those conversations, I suppose, with their leaders, and to try and flip it that way instead of sometimes it always being driven by the other way. And wonder if you've got any suggestions on that.
Well, I do appreciate that not everybody works in organisations where, leaders are actually open to having these kinds of conversations. But I think hopefully you have mechanisms by which to give feedback, including through staff surveys and, more informally as well. But I think, look, the good news in this is that at a population level, so, looking at it universally, not by business, workplace to workplace, things are absolutely changing for the better. Leaders and managers are finally recognising, not just because of the data that Comcare, you started talking about, Megan, that this costs a shed load of money if we don't get it right. And it's the biggest driver of lack of productivity and cost for business. But that's not the reason we should be thinking about this. And the one thing that the pandemic has done is it's fast tracked. It's absolutely put on the fast track workplaces and leaders within workplaces recognizing that this is not just a nice to do, it's actually a business imperative, and it's a human imperative too. So the number of inquiries that we're getting around what a mentally healthy workplace looks like has really increased. There's lots and lots of activity going on in this space. The National Mental Health Commission is leading an initiative which we know Comcare is part of, Beyond Blue is part of too, called the National Mental Healthy Workplace Alliance. And there's a National Workplace Initiative that's, I think, going to be launched relatively soon, which will create a whole bunch of resources and tools for businesses of all shapes and sizes. But to me, business leaders, if they're not getting it, they're soon going to start to see it in their data.
I think that's right. And I think, as you said, it's
whether that's claims, whether that's turnover,
That's right. Yeah. I think that's right. And I think it's no longer something that's it's tangible. It's something that's going to, certainly is tangible and will be front and center. I'm conscious of the time. I can't believe it. It's nearly to time. So unfortunately, we're going to have to end our questions there, but we will commit to summarising the questions. And so I know Georgie and I had a conversation prior to this to acknowledge that we might not get to all the questions today. So what we will do as a team and commit to is taking the questions, theming them up, and then putting some information back out in response to those questions as a way to continue the conversation. So thank you so much for your generosity in all of your comments, and also for feeding off each other, because I can see there's been a lot of conversations between people. So well done, and thank you so much for that. So on behalf of all of us, I would like to extend my thanks very much to Georgie for joining us today. We really appreciate hearing your insights, and also for taking the time out on this very important day, World Mental Health Day. We know you're incredibly busy, and it's great to have you here and available to us to have this conversation.